So today I'm at St Mary the Virgin in Corringham, which is located in Corringham in Essex, which is close to the River Thames. It's about 7 miles from Tilbury, which is an ancient crossing point between Essex and Kent. And if we look down that road there's a hill there which goes off to the Thames. So the Roman army were here from 1st century, and it looks like they brought over a guy called Cura, who was a mercenary, and he settled here. And looks like by the 4th century there was a Saxon community here. St Ced, who was sent down from Lindisfarne to convert the locals or the pagans to Christianity, he set up a monastery in Tilbury in 653 AD, and after that, at some point, there was a wooden church that was built here. Looked like it lasted for about 150 years, and if you want to see a similar church to that, you can see one at Greenstead Church in Ongar. So from 860 AD, we've got Viking attack in the area. You alright? Right. They would have made their way up the hills around here and attacked this church. The local residents would have taken refuge inside the wooden building. And by 878, the area was under the control of Guthrum, who was a Viking leader, and he had the whole of East Anglia and London under his control. He was Christianised. There were still pockets of Saxon rule within the marshes, and there were also tribes or pirates on the coast here. Alfred the Great, he had the other side of the Thames in Kent, and it stayed this way until 886, and peace returned. In 886, the Vikings were expelled by Alfred the Great, and peace returned again. Now in 1016 you've got Knut the Great, the Danish Viking, and he united the countries of Sweden, Denmark and Norway, and he basically took this, he had the power of this area, and he was here for 19 years. So if we go over to the church now, and we can see some of the original stonework, what had happened was at some point when the wooden church was under attack, they reinforced it with stone, building a 3-foot thick wall encasing it, and the tower was also built soon after. So let's have a look. Now we're going to go over to, we're actually going to walk on an ancient, let's get that, that's better. We're going to use the ancient walking route, and if you look on here, you can see some of the old stones, some of the old holes that would have been used for the bars and rails that were used. So it's believed that this tower is from 1050, and this would be not long after King Canute and the Danes would have left. I believe there were further Viking raids, but they were never successful. And you can see the original windows. It's built in 3 stages. There's the 2nd and 3rd stage. Originally it would have had a flat roof. So if we go around to the south side, so this is part of the nave. This wall here is original Saxon. It's in herringbone, and this section here is a later date. And if we go round here to the nave, you can see a section of the original herringbone. We've got diagonal laying of ragstone and flint. This section is Victorian, along with the windows. This is original Saxon. It's incredible to think that this could be around the 9th century. And you can see where they've laid massive stones. And you can see where it ends. The original, this would be the nave, and this would be the chancel. This would be where it ended. This was extended later on. So if you can imagine that the walls were here at a certain height, and in 1066 the Normans invaded England and quickly established rule here, and one of the first things that they did do was to take strategic posts like this church and reinforce them. The Normans were very worried that the Saxons would rebel and overthrow them, so one of the first things they did was to reinforce these buildings. Now in 1066 Corringham was ruled by a guy called Segar, and he owned land and a manor here. But after 1066 Bishop Odo of Bayeux, who was the half brother of William the Conqueror himself, he was made Earl of Kent, and he virtually ruled England when his brother was away from the country. So it's highly likely that Bishop Bayeux was here or visited. Now if you go inside the church, which you can't see now obviously, there's an arch which connects the west tower to the nave. And at the top of it there is a stone head of a Norman complete with moustache, and it's believed that this is Bishop Bayeux. Now we're now going to go over to the next phase of this church, and we've got the family, the Baud family. It's B-A-U-D, and they came over from Germany. And looks like they came over in the 1066 conquest, and after that they were in royal service to William, and by 1210 they owned a manor and land and other manors in Corringham and around the area, and by 1310 we have the manor that was passed down to Sir William de Bauds. I'll set the camera up here. Now, William de Bauds was against King Edward II in the Barons' War, and because of this he was imprisoned, and his lands and the manor were confiscated. And it was only when Edward II died and Edward III came into power that William de Burgh was released and his lands were returned along with his status. He was so happy that he built this section of the church, which is the North Chapel, and it's dedicated to St. Catherine. St. Catherine was a lady that had her back broken over a wheel, and if you go inside there's a statue of some age which shows this, or at least shows the wheel, and it's on top of a stone which comes from St. Paul's Cathedral. So this chapel was started here in 1328, and you can see it's built in rows of flint. Inside there is a screen which separates the chapel from the north aisle, and that dates to 1330, and we can go round and we can see the next building that was built. So this building here is Victorian Vestry that was added in the 19th century. So if we continue around the vestry, we can see the other side. This was originally the north aisle. Now it makes up part of the nave, again built in the same style of flint. If we go around to the west side, you can see how it's built. It looks like the Bauds family would not mix with the local residents in the main chancel, so they would have service in their own chapel. And we know in 1330 daily mass for the villagers took place at the high altar, whereas the Bauds family would use the North Chapel. Now, just 10 years later, 1340, this area came under Black Death and the Great Famine, and in that period the church lost 6 of its rectors. If I come back a bit. By 1400 the church was suffering from a lack of repairs and people, and skilled people. So 15th century repairs and funds started to come back. So you can imagine they put in some glass in the windows. The spire got some shingles to make it watertight. Now the interesting thing was that the Bauds family had their own priest, a separate priest, who was also a school teacher for the village. So the children here will be educated to some standard. Now when the English Reformation came, one of the things they did was to remove the second priest, and hence the teacher, and a lot of the medieval glass was knocked out of this church. The walls were whitewashed, and the rood screen and a lot of the carvings were thrown out and burnt, I guess. So we got 2 archdeacon visits in 1565 and 1638, and in both occasions the church was in a bit of a poor state. At one point there was wood that was stored in the chancel. Oliver Cromwell came through here, and yet more changes. The removal of the prayer book, and over the centuries 1760, up to about 1840, more repairs were carried out, but they were never substantial repairs. And in 1840 the chancel arch actually collapsed. There was great funding in 1842 and repairs were carried out. And going over the decades, in the 19th century, there were more repairs to the roof. So it was that period that saved the church. Now, I just wanted to look at this door, which is the north door, which traditionally would have been the priest door, which is of interest. And I'm just wondering if the Bauds family used this as an entrance to their chapel. So if we move now on to the 20th century, we have World War II, which affected this church. On the 8th of December 1940, so we'd only been at war for so many months, a bomb fell in this vicinity here. The shrapnel you can still see. If you look at this headstone, it's been broken off and you can still see the pot marks. And if you carry on here, now the damage that did to the church was it took out all the roofs, blew out all the windows, or most of the windows. What was done from that, they collected all the fragments that were salvageable and they installed them in the east window. And I highly recommend, if you can visit this church and get inside, possibly after a Sunday Mass, I guess. If you look there, it's hard to see, but there are sections in each window that have been salvaged. St Mary's has had 62 rectors, and the first was Robert de Bauds, 1309. If you go inside the church, you have in the floor you have various tombstones that date from 13th and 14th centuries. In the chancel, under a carpet, there is a priest that was here. He was called Richard de Belton, and it's dated to 1340. So he would have been one of the first priests, and it's fantastic brass from a very early medieval period. So back to the tower. This church has got 3 bells, and they date from 1580 to 1617 and 1629. The first bell is by John Deere, and when I looked up John Deere came from Hitchin, or that area, and he had a foundry there, and sadly in 1603 he was hung because he got into a fight and he broke a man's neck. The 1617 and 1629 bells, they were cast by Thomas Birtlet of Whitechapel Foundry in London, and he was the Whitechapel foundry is one of the oldest in the world, or if not the oldest in the world, or longest running, I think. And I found that many of the Birtlet bells were cast for city churches in London. Sadly, most of them lost to the Great Fire of London, but some survived. But the Birtlet family went on to the end of 17th century. Thomas Birtlet died only 3 years after the bells here were installed. But his grandson James, he went on to supply Christopher Wren's churches in London. This churchyard, if you look at the shape of it, it's a triangle formation, and it tapers to there, to that end. And it's said that that house, in the pink house in the distance, was built at some stage in the centuries on church property. Traditionally, this is the north side, and the north side would be used for people that had committed suicide. They were unmarried, perhaps, or out of wedlock, or the children, and even people that had washed up on the coastline here. So from 1558 to 1941, we have 3,142 burials, and on top of that you have to count back to the Saxon period. Now today the church has a congregation of about 80 people, and it's a Catholic style of faith. They hold mass here on Sundays, and very welcoming people, and I highly recommend a walk through here. Now, one of the other things I'd like to mention is this ancient walkway. So it basically goes, now it goes across there and it goes over the busy road there and off to the marshes, which is the original route. If you follow it now, it was used as a smuggler's path. The contraband would be brought up from the Thames or the marshes, and it's said that underneath the Bull Inn there are cellars, possible tunnels, and it will be brought up here. Now, I believe these steps, even these steps go back a few hundred years, maybe more. You can see it on old drawings, and I'll show you the footpath that carries on. If you follow this footpath, it will go to Vange, and then Benfleet, and then Hadley Castle. And Hadley Castle was also a famous haunt for smugglers, and it's alleged that Dick Turpin used it as a place that he could hide his contraband. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.